Hey y'all, what's up? It's Darren. Welcome back to the Touch MBA podcast. It's a rainy evening here in Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam. I just want to welcome you to the show. Thanks so much for listening. If this show has helped you, just a request I make every 100 episodes or so. But if this show has helped you, I'd really appreciate if you leave a review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to this show. It just helps more people discover the show, and we can brag that we have a lot of positive reviews when we approach top-ranked business schools to come on the show. So I'd really appreciate if you could help us out there. So this week I wanted to record a quick one based on a recent conversation I had with an applicant. But before we get to the topic, I also want to do just a quick housekeeping on our school selection help service that we give for free. We recently updated our school matching algorithm. So basically you can choose your top 5 criteria for picking a school, whether that's ranking, location, length of program, ROI, alumni rating of the program, student rating of career services, etc., etc. And based on your top 5 criteria, another one I just remembered is top rank specializations. Based on your top 5 must-have criteria, we send you your top 10 matches on a 100-point scale. So that's newly updated. I also haven't talked about this on the show, but if you do decide to come to touchmba.com and submit your profile and get feedback there, we basically score you on a 15-point scale, which is broken down into 3 categories: your academic aptitude, your employability, and what we call your ambassadorial potential. And obviously, this whole admissions process is more art than science. If it was a science, then you'd just have to score 740 on your GMAT, and then you'd get into all the top programs. But we all know it doesn't work that way. But with this 15-point scale, I've tried my best to give you a more scientific approach to how you could improve your score and hence your chances of getting into these programs. And what I found, and this is from last year when we studied our results, based on, I think it was something like 444 people like you, applicants who got into top schools. And what we learned from studying our score from these 444 successful MBA applicants compared to the score we believe you need to get into some of these top-ranked MBA programs is, long story short, we score hard. We score an average of 2.15 points below what is required, in our opinion, to get into these programs. So, for example, if we think that to get into Stanford and Harvard, which we believe are the toughest programs to get into, maybe you need 14 or 15 points out of 15 points to get in. That on average, applicants who came to Touch MBA who got into these schools were scoring an average of, say, 11.85, right? They were scoring about 2.15 points below what we thought was necessary. So we do score hard. And while I don't want this to discourage you guys from applying to your target schools or your dream schools, but we're doing the best we can given the limited information you send us, which is basically your resume, if you do choose to include it, and many of you don't, your test scores, and your career goals. And the point is that you'll have so many more opportunities in your application to give evidence for your academic potential, for your employability, for your ambassadorial potential. So we do our absolute best to give you, a better idea of where you might stand with these schools, but that's given, the limited information you provide us. Honestly, what we're trying to do is kind of an impossible task, right? It takes you less than 5 minutes to submit your profile, and we try to say where you're competitive at. Nevertheless, I think that it is still helpful. Our rubric is still helpful because you'll get more ideas on how you can bolster your score and thus your profile when you apply to these schools. But, it always hurts to hear from applicants who come back to us and say, oh, well, you said this school was a stretch, so, I didn't apply to it. Or you said this school was a stretch and I got in, which, great. We love when you guys get into these top programs. So I think that our rating system, I call it tough love, because you do have to show those things to top schools to get in. And oftentimes, whether it's because we have limited information on you, we can't read all your essays, all your recommendations, we don't look at all your transcripts, and you don't have the full space to tell your story with interviews, etc. Yeah, we're not able to capture your complete profile, but we do the best we can. This is a long way of saying that I don't want to discourage any of you from pursuing your target schools. We will give our best unbiased opinion of where you stand given the information you send to us. But remember, you have plenty of chances to bolster your score with your complete application to the school. So this week, I want to talk about a potential weakness many of you might think you have with your work experience before applying to your MBA, and that is that you have jumped around to many different organizations, many different jobs. Say in your 5 years of work experience, maybe you've worked for 5 different organizations, right? Or in your 3 years of work experience, you've worked with 3 organizations. And so the question you might have is, well, how does this look to admissions officers? How are they going to view this? Does this hurt my chances? Maybe in your current job, you want to switch again, but you're wondering how this will affect, your profile and whether you should stick around with your current organization to show progression, for example. So I have a couple thoughts here. This is going to be a really quick episode, kind of off the top of my head. Again, I recently spoke with an applicant who had this problem, and I think there's a couple strategies here that might be able to help you. So if you are one of these applicants who has, worked for multiple organizations, say 4 organizations in 3 years, and it seems like you're jumping around a lot, maybe you only stay 1 year or less with certain organizations. I think there's 3 potential strategies that I can think of. One is to connect your work experience thematically. For example, maybe you've always worked in a business development capacity. Maybe you're starting a new department at one company that's in the shipping industry. Maybe you're helping the vice chairman start a new department or initiative in the publishing industry. Maybe you're helping to launch an MBA program for one of Singapore's top business schools. And I know all these examples because guess what? That was me, right? So I worked in 3 very different industries, MBA admissions, scientific publishing, energy shipping. But if I linked those all by saying, I start new stuff, essentially, right? I'm best with the blank page. And so a lot of these companies have hired me to start new departments, and these are new initiatives, and these are my results. So this is one way to connect, all the different organizations you've worked for and perhaps the many different roles you've been in, if you can connect them thematically somehow. Maybe that could be the type of work you're doing. Maybe it could be industry. Maybe it could be something else, who knows? So yeah, that's one strategy. The second strategy I'd say is you need to find the lesson, right? And you need to show how you've learned something so valuable from jumping around so much that you could really contribute to your class. And I think of another industry, when I think of this strategy, I think of the National Basketball Association, the NBA in the United States, the premier basketball league. you always hear about how every championship team needs a veteran, right? The guy that's been with 6 or 7 teams, maybe he's been in the league for, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it is, but he's a journeyman. He's played for many different franchises, many different coaches. He's maybe not the best player on each team, but for whatever reason, he's ended up on all these different teams during his career, right? And usually they bring in these vets or veterans to guide the younger players, right? The players who are just coming in from college, to be a strong voice in the locker room, to help team cohesion and to be the sort of glue guys on the team. Obviously this isn't going to be the case for those of you who maybe you've only worked 3 years or 4 years, but the principle behind this, I think, is really strong. In other words, all your jumping around and all your diverse experiences give you a special point of view that you can bring to the MBA program to add value to the business school and to, more importantly, to your classmates. What is the lesson? What is the point of view you can bring from being with all these different organizations? Maybe they're in different geographies, different industries, but you need to make that case. Does that make sense? So I think that's another way you can turn, many different jobs into a strength. And a side note here, the applicant I spoke to, he didn't make it clear in his resume what year he graduated from college, and he had 7 different organizations he had worked for. So I think it's really important to make your resume easy to digest for the admissions officer. So for example, if he had said he had graduated in 2015, I would have known right away that when he started his own business from 2011 to 2015, that was during college, right? As opposed to trying to figure out, well, did he start his own business after college and then he worked 5 more years for these different corporations, or what's the deal? So make sure that your resume is easy to digest from a chronological perspective. And you can just give your resume to a colleague, a boss, or a friend, with experience, and ask them, are the chapters of my career clearly demarcated? Okay. So the second potential way to deal with jumping around a lot in your career would be to find the lesson and translate to how you could take those lessons and really contribute to your class. The third strategy is to take that lesson that you learned from jumping around, that insight, and apply it to how it really shaped your ideas for your post-MBA goals or what you want to do with your life. So let me explain this further. This is kind of the equivalent of, in the startup world, we hear a lot that, you just need to try a lot of different stuff. You have to throw a lot of things against the wall and see what sticks, whether that's companies or products or ideas, what have you, when you're looking for that product market fit. I think that this what sticks to the wall metaphor is kind of the same idea you could use to show that you found special sort of career insight or life purpose insight from all the varied work you've done. In other words, you traveled to many distant lands searching for the Holy Grail, or perhaps not even searching for the Holy Grail. Perhaps you were just randomly at that place, right? But then you stumbled onto this treasure, this insight about yourself, about the world, about your career, about your life purpose, about what you want to do, about the people you want to serve, etc., etc. You stumbled upon this treasure-like insight through all your different jobs or through one of those jobs that really inspires you to therefore pursue your MBA and pursue this career path, right? Maybe it was a person that you stumbled onto. It could be so many different things, but I think that's another way where you can kind of defend your experience. Whether it was intentionally designed that way or not, The important thing is you got that clarity, that career clarity or that career insight. To make this a little more concrete, the applicant I spoke to, for example, he had listed 7 different organizations he had worked for, and even though he'd only been working for 5 years. Now, I found out later that 2 or 3 of those were because he had worked or interned for certain organizations during college, but that wasn't clear in his resume. So, once you make the graduation year clear, that should be easier for the admissions reader to parse. But remember that you'll have plenty of opportunities in the actual online application itself to list your internship experiences or to list your work accomplishments or other accomplishments from your college days in the application. So therefore, you can take those organizations out of your resume, right? I mean, unless they really contribute to your story that it must be told, they must be listed to tell your story clearly, then I would include them. But I think in most cases, I would take those out. So again, it's just easier for the admissions officer to digest your resume. It looks like you didn't jump around as much, right? Because there's 2 or 3 less organizations under your professional work experience category. So that's what I advised him and what I would advise you. One last tip is that, listen, I understand that, no career goes straight to the right and straight up, right? It's very much a zigzag, and oftentimes you'll be fortunate to work under fantastic mentors and bosses, and sometimes you'll work under some pretty crappy bosses. Sometimes you'll be put into departments or projects that get canceled, get shut down, and that's just bad luck. That was nothing that was really under your control. That's tough. That's happened to me during my career, but I think you want to avoid making a lot of excuses. Usually, where would this fall? This would fall in the optional essay, right? A lot of schools give you some extra space in case you need to tell them something that falls outside the application. And usually applicants use the optional essay to talk about, for example, why their academic performance was poor freshman or sophomore year, or why it dropped senior year. Maybe they had an illness or an unfortunate accident in the family or some other extenuating circumstance. And that's important, right? That's important to tell the admissions teams of top business schools. But I think that when this happens, when you encounter this sort of bad luck in your career, yeah, it's definitely bad luck. But then what you need to keep the focus on is how you reacted to that bad luck. So in other words, you want to own your situation, whatever it is, bad or good, and show these business schools how you made the most of it, right? So don't leave it as, in case some of you might be thinking like, oh, well, unfortunately I had this tough health circumstance, or my boss was shit. Yeah, I just cussed. That's okay. Of course, you're not going to say that during the interview, but you might say that in nicer words, right? Even if you couch it in nicer words, if you leave it at that when trying to explain, maybe your work performance or the career steps you took, that doesn't leave a really nice taste, right? Because it kind of puts you in this passive position. Things are happening to you. And yes, things happen to all of us in our careers, no doubt. But I just want to, encourage you that if you are one of those applicants that has, a really tough story, claim it, own it. So turn it around, right? Show how you made the most out of that situation with that bad boss or that bad company or that department shutting down. What did you learn from that? What did you take from that? What did you do, most importantly, right? Because again, like what admissions is trying to do is get an idea, some sort of signal to predict your future behavior. So if you're going to kind of take a passive role and bad things are happening to you, well, these MBA programs, they're pretty intense, right? There's going to be a lot of stuff thrown at you, and they don't want a student who kind of doesn't take charge of his or her situation. yeah, that's just my last tip. And this podcast is kind of recorded more casually off the top of my head. I hope you find it useful. And we'll get back to more interviews with admissions directors in the next couple episodes. One other idea I've had, and I'm going to play around with it, is, recording more cutting edge sort of admissions strategies in our Admissions Edge course. It's a private community there. It's a smaller group. And so we can kind of share cutting edge ideas to best present yourself, best present your case. I can throw out maybe some more far out stuff that's more controversial out there, that's more cutting edge, but it's probably best kept for a smaller private group. So I'm thinking of recording more episodes in a similar vein to this, maybe obviously a bit shorter and more focused, but yeah, and putting these in the Admissions Edge course. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them. Otherwise, I'm wishing you guys all the best preparing your round 1 applications, and we'll be back soon with the next episode